Well, good evening to everyone who's joining us tonight for the Big Basin Water Company Town Hall on December 3rd, 2024. Folks are just filtering into the call, so we'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to arrive and then we'll get started. All right, once again, welcome everyone to the Big Basin Town Hall meeting. We're going to give the opportunity to our community members just 30 seconds longer to join the call, and then we will get started. So thanks for your patience. All right, I'll turn it over to Supervisor McPherson.
All right, thank you, Jam. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for an update on the status of the Big Basin Water Company. This will be my final town hall regarding Big Basin as your county supervisor representing the 5th District. And when I look back at the 12 years that I've been in office, I can say that playing a role in stabilizing Big Basin Water on behalf of its customers, especially since the CZU fire, has been something that I'm very proud of, that our office is proud of, and everybody else who has worked on this effort. And it has been a huge effort that predates the fire, really. It has required countless hours of collaboration with customers and partners ever since, and will continue into my term and into the next term of our 5th District Supervisor-elect, Monica Martinez, who is on this call tonight. I have really, truly appreciated the hard work that has been put into this effort by Big Basin customers, a lot of patience, and as well as the court receiver, Nicholas Jaber, who you're going to hear from tonight, and his operational partner, Miles Farmer of Cypress Water. We could not have gotten far without the commitment and strong coordination of the following agencies. And I just have to read from this because this was a collaborative effort like I have never experienced. The biggest collaborative effort I've experienced as a county supervisor. First of all, the County Office of Response, Recovery, and Resilience, which is managing an $850,000 state grant on behalf of Big Basin Water, and Dave Reed. Also, thank you to the County Water Resources Division, the County Council, and both the Public Works and Planning Divisions of the County Department of Community Development and Infrastructure, which we've combined in the county. There's some special people that I would really like to recognize, and they are Dave Reed, Sierra Ryan, Matt Machado, Carolyn Burke, Jocelyn Drake, and their staffs, all of which have been supported by our County Administrative Officer, Carlos Palacios, who said, yeah, let's get this done, keep going, do what you have to do to make this become a better system for everyone. And I also want to thank the offices of State Senator John Laird and Assemblymember Gail Pellerin and their various staff members, as well as the offices of Congressman Jimmy Panetta and Anna Eshoo. Yeah, we got the state and federal agencies involved and pressuring in on this too. Like I said, it was a tremendous collaborative effort. And there's several state agencies that have also played significant roles in this. The State Water Resources Control Board Division of Drinking Water, the Department of Water Resources, the Department of Financial Assistance, the Department of Water Rights, the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, the California Public Utilities Commission, and the Office of Attorney General. I mean, to coordinate and collaborate at the same time has been a years-long effort, and that's what it's taken. I've never experienced a receivership like this. I don't know if the county has in Santa Cruz, but we've made it, and it's a success. And lastly, we have forged a wonderful partnership with LAFCO, and you're going to be hearing from Joe Serrano, I think, probably tonight as well. Moonshot Missions and the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, all of whom you will hear from tonight. In short, getting this far, both for the drinking water and wastewater sides of Big Basin water, really has involved the work of dozens of people at more than a dozen agencies and organizations during the past 4 years. Thank you for your patience, but the main thing is it's going to be a success. And the presentation tonight will have plenty of time for Q&A, which will be moderated by my staff analyst, J.M. Brown, who introduced us to this today. And I just want to say that without J.M. Brown and my staff, who has put countless hours into this, this would not be a reality. He is the one that coordinated everybody getting together and really communicating with one another and taking this next step forward. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our court receiver for Big Basin Water, who has been up to Boulder Creek with one of these, Nicholas Jaber, for brief comments and introduction of our speakers. But lastly, I just want to say thank you for your patience. Thank everyone, state, federal, county, who participated in this to make this a success as it is and it's going to be. And it's going to provide tremendous services to the people of Big Basin Water Company. So Nicholas, if you want to take over, please do so. And I can't thank you enough. This has been a long haul, but we're there. We're getting to the finish line. So thank you.
Supervisor McPherson, thank you very much for your kind remarks. And on behalf of my team, and I'm sure I'm echoing the sentiments of the entire community within Big Basin when I say that we're grateful for your many years of service. I'm sure not only to the county of Santa Cruz, but in fact to the state of California. And we're sad to see you go, but we're looking ahead, and we appreciate all of the support you've given us as we've navigated this road. Everyone, I am Nicholas Jaber. Perhaps you already know that by now. We've had a few chances over the past year to meet and have discussions regarding the Big Basin Water Company. Tonight, as always, I address you on behalf of the court receiver for the Big Basin Water Company, which is my firm, Servium by Right, LLP. Besides my role as an attorney, I oversee all receivership appointments for the firm, including, of course, those pertaining to the Big Basin Water Company. Some 6 months ago, in May, the supervisor and I hosted a town hall meeting. That one was in person in the firehouse. And before that, in November of 2023, shortly after the court appointed my firm as the court receiver for the Big Basin Water Company, we held our first town hall. And so it truly is my pleasure tonight to continue on that 6-month schedule and address you all this evening for the third Big Basin Water Company Town Hall. Unlike our last two meetings, of course, this one is purely virtual. And also, unlike our past town hall meetings, the purpose of this town hall will be more to highlight the findings and support of other organizations outside of my firm, which have worked with my team over the past year to chart Big Basin's course moving forward. First, you will hear from Joe Serrano, who is the executive director of the Santa Cruz County LAFCO. Joe will speak about LAFCO's role in Big Basin's future and the governance options report, which it published regarding the Big Basin Water Company. Second, you will hear from Lydia Rossiter with, Lydia will be presenting, but Lydia, along with her colleague, Richette Gaber-Merriam, represents Moonshot Missions. You might remember Lydia from our May Town Hall meeting, where she introduced the Moonshot Big Basin partnership. Tonight, very excited to announce that Lydia will be presenting the findings. In fact, the landmark system-wide evaluation that Moonshot has authored and published regarding the Big Basin Water Company drinking water system. That report has been published on our website, and you're more than welcome to go and view it in real time while Lydia is speaking, if you find that helpful. Third, you'll hear from Vita Lopez and Jean Thompson of the Rural Communities Assistance Center, or RCAC, regarding the important work that their organization is doing to conduct an income survey of the Big Basin community. Finally, I will offer brief remarks regarding the operational and financial status of the Big Basin drinking water system. We intend to keep all remarks to 1 hour or less to allow ample time for Q&A, which will occur once all have finished speaking. So while we ask that you hold your verbal questions until the designated Q&A portion, I encourage you to submit written questions via the chat function at any time during the various presentations. Overall, so many amazing people and organizations have stepped up to support our effort to save the Big Basin Water Company over the past year. And I am thrilled that Joe, Lydia, Richette, Vita, and Jean are here to address you directly this evening. So without further ado, I present Mr. Joe Serrano, Executive Director of Santa Cruz County LAFCO.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Joe Serrano. I'm the Executive Officer for the Local Agency Formation Commission, better known as LAFCO. Now, some of you may have one or two thoughts in mind right now. First one may be like, what the heck is LAFCO? And the second one may be, why is LAFCO even here? So I'll start with the first one. LAFCO is a state agency. We're the ones that determine who's the most logical provider for public services. So when I say public services, I mean water, sewer, fire protection, etc. And when I say service providers, I'm referring to cities and special districts. So in order for us to determine that, we can do boundary changes. And just to give you an example, some of you may recall back in 2016, Lompico Water District merged with San Lorenzo Valley Water District. That went through the LAFCO process. More recently, some of you may have seen that Branson 40 Fire Protection District was annexed or added into the Scotts Valley the Scotts Valley Fire Protection District. Again, that went through the LAFCO process. So LAFCO is the tool used to ensure the best possible level of service when it comes to public services and local agencies. I will note that while LAFCOs have full jurisdictions over cities and special districts like water districts and fire districts, we have no purview over private water companies or private water systems or mutual water companies. That being said, state law does allow LAFCO to analyze private water systems if deemed necessary, which leads to the second thought you might have had, why is LAFCO here? Well, earlier this year, LAFCO conducted a report that looked at the possible governance options that the court receiver and the community could consider for the future of Big Basin water. For example, one of the options that we analyzed, and it was a high-level analysis, is the pros and cons for annexing the Big Basin community to San Lorenzo Valley Water District. What are the pros and cons? Is that feasible? Again, it was a high-level analysis. Other options that we looked at was, what about forming a water district? Is that possible? Or transferring ownership from the existing owners to a new private entity? Some of these options don't even require LAFCO action, but the intent of this report was to lay out all the options in one document. As Supervisor McPherson mentioned, that it was all hands on deck. So we had different agencies identifying possible options. So LAFCO wanted to be part of the solution. And one way of doing that was developing this report, which kind of allowed LAFCO to connect Moonshot Missions with the court receiver. And what you're going to hear tonight is Moonshot Mission took the options to another level. They actually did a more thorough and robust analysis of those options than what the LAFCO report identified. So long story short, if you don't remember anything that I just said, LAFCO should be seen as a resource, not only for the court receiver, but for the community. If we determine that annexation to a water district is what the community wants to explore, LAFCO will do everything in its power to make that possible, if we can. I want the community to see LAFCO as a tool and as a resource. With that being said, I'm here tonight to answer any questions when it comes to the governance options, particularly the ones that do involve LAFCO action, whether it's annexations, formation of a new water district, et cetera. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and, again, be a resource to you, the community. With that, I'll defer back to Mr. Nicholas, and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm now pleased to present Lydia Rossiter, Senior Program Manager for Moonshot Missions.
Thank you, Nick. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share. Give me 1 second to get it set up. Okay. All right, so I'm Lydia with Moonshot Missions, and I'm joined by my colleague, Rochette. Tonight, we're going to do a brief introduction about who we are and our work for those of the group who did not attend the May Town Hall meeting. Then we'll walk through what we're doing for Big Basin and what has been accomplished so far. We'll focus on the results of the needs assessment, technical, managerial, and financial, and the alternatives analysis that Mr. Joe just mentioned, and what our conclusions are from those. So as I said, we are Lydia and Rochette with Moonshot Missions. A little bit about us. We are nonprofit consultants who provide advice to utilities to help them operate better. We work with both drinking water and wastewater utilities, assisting them with their tough challenges. We are not selling anything and won't benefit financially based on the choices made by utilities. Our services are usually at no cost, as is the case here, and this time it's free because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. The concept behind Moonshot is to help utilities all across the country access funding for improvements to their systems and to operate more sustainably. So that's a little bit about us. Here's what Moonshot has agreed to do for Big Basin in our partnership and our progress so far, and our progress is shown by the check marks here. First, 360-degree evaluation. We've conducted an assessment on Big Basin's technical, managerial, and financial elements. We've identified short, medium, and long-term priority projects. And then for the different options being considered for the future of Big Basin, we've evaluated long-term sustainability and potential funding. And we've developed a roadmap of items moving forward, including documenting and advising on water rights and determining whether Big Basin will qualify as a disadvantaged community when looking at funding. And that is through a partnership with RCAC, which is ongoing. And hopefully soon we'll begin applying for funding. I will now turn the presentation over to Rochette to discuss our observations on the technical portion of the assessment.
Great, thank you, Lydia. I just want to make sure you guys hear me okay. Perfect. So Good evening, everyone. As Lydia mentioned, we completed a technical manager and financial assessment of Big Basin. So I'll just be focusing on the technical aspects of our findings and providing a quick overview of our key observations. So this doesn't include everything. So I'll cover source, treatment, storage, pump stations, and distribution system. Next slide. Yeah, so starting with Big Basin's primary water sources, well 4 is the main production well that the system relies on, as you all know. And in addition to well 4, there is Big Basin purchases water from the San Lorenzo Valley Water District. And there are other sources, but they're mostly inactive. So 3 additional wells, well 2, well 1, and well 5, and then 1 surface water intake, Jameson Spring intake. So well 2 is a low capacity well. It produces about 18 gallons per minute and is generally kept offline. Well 1 is completely disconnected from the systems and is inactive. Well 5 is a horizontal well that's under the influence of surface water, but its exact location and status are uncertain. And lastly, during our site visit, we observed that the Jameson Spring intake was being diverted into a 1,000-gallon plastic storage tank and is also being sent to an open-air reservoir near the Jameson tank. So it is unclear to Big Basin how this water is being used. It's neither treated nor distributed by Big Basin. So we recommend investigating the diversion from this creek to understand its usage, as well, as well as identifying affected customers if there are any, so they can be reconnected to the main treated water system if necessary. Next slide. Okay, so source water quantity. So regarding the water quantity, the California State Board's 2021 assessment noted that Big Basin doesn't meet its 10-year maximum day demand of 0.62 million gallons per day with the available capacity from well 4. So this just means that the production from well 4 is not sufficient to meet the highest anticipated demand. And currently, well 4 produces between 0.3 and 0.4 million gallons per day, which is quite an improvement from before, but it still falls short of the required 0.62 million gallons per day. So that's something we noted. Additionally, the production fluctuates, I think, which we mentioned before. During our site visit, it was between 200 and 280 gallons per minute. In addition, there's no redundant source within the system. So both well 1 and well 2 are inactive. So Big Basin really relies on supplemental water from San Lorenzo Valley. So some improvements were made to the intertie to increase its capacity, install VFD and so on, but there's still some concerns that remain since there's no formal agreement with SLV or San Lorenzo Valley for the purchase of water. And it's also significantly more expensive as well, as Nick has mentioned multiple times. Lastly, we noted that Big Basin has backup systems in place to mitigate potential disruption at the source. So they've installed generator at well 4. They're also purchasing a spare pump for well 4 and related equipment to reduce downtime in case of failure. So there's some backup systems there. Next slide. Okay, so on the water quality front, there hasn't been any significant issues. There's no contamination sources nearby, no water quality concerns. Additionally, the well site is not subject to flooding. The site is designated as area of minimal flood hazard. However, as you already know, and as you can see on the map, the site is at high risk for wildfires. It falls within a very high fire hazard severity zone. So that's a significant threat for the water system. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to water treatment. Post-fire, Big Basin only uses groundwater and finished water from SLV. The Jameson treatment plant that was there was lost in the fire. So currently the only treatment is chlorination at well 4, which was in good condition during our site visit. Next slide. Okay, so regarding storage, Big Basin lost a couple of storage tanks in the fire. Currently, there's 7 storage tanks in the system with a total capacity of 639,000 gallons. So Big Basin has adequate storage. However, some of the tanks don't meet regulatory standards since they lack some features like overflow pipes, drains, and so on. Additionally, some of the tanks, particularly the plastic ones, are not protected from natural hazards. So, for example, heat from wildfires. This is plastic. Aside from that, there's no formal inspection maintenance program for the storage tanks, but it is important to note that Big Basin has been focusing on maintaining the basic functionality of the system. So its primary efforts are more directed towards keeping essential components operational and also just replacing damaged equipment or components as resources allow. Next slide. Okay, so pump stations, Big Basin operates 7 pump stations, each in varying conditions. Some of the pump stations are new, some of the pumps are new and in good condition. Some are aging and need replacement. Several pumps are housed in vulnerable structures, wooden structures as well, and most lack backup power. Also, another important note is there are 2 pump stations that serve water via temporary unsecured plastic pipes that could fail during a fire event or high heat events. So yeah, those are some of our notes on that. Next slide. Okay, so onto the distribution system. During our site visit, there are several areas of concern. The first one is that Big Basin did not have a comprehensive inventory of pipe materials. A lot of the records were destroyed during the fire and were being recreated. However, this was recently completed. Nick just informed us about that. So currently, Big Basin has a complete inventory of his pipe materials. Other areas of concern, Big Basin does not have a formal water main replacement program. There's some issues with water loss and leakage to the absence of a leak detection and repair program. So the leaks are repaired as they're discovered. And then some critical maintenance programs are not in place as well. So like line flushing, fire hydrant flushing, exercising valves, inspecting valves, and so on. In terms of meters, Big Basin has completed its meter inventory, so there's no, so now 100% of the meters have been assessed and mapped. However, there's no formal meter calibration replacement program in place. Meters are replaced on an as-needed basis. Next slide. So for fire hydrants, there is no formal program for controlling or monitoring their use. And also there's an established condition assessment or replacement program for these. But again, it's important to note that some of these programs are not in place since Big Basin, since the receiver has been given priority to maintaining basic functionality of the system. So has not had the chance to recreate some of this. So moving on to cross-connection control, Big Basin lacks a comprehensive cross-connection control program. Currently, there are 13 backflow devices, but the records were lost in the fire. So these records need to be rebuilt. So these are like testing records and so on, maintenance records and so on. During our site visit, we observed that there is no backflow prevention devices at some of the high-risk sites, so like the wastewater treatment plant. But I believe a backflow device is being installed this week. Nick can clarify later. There's also potential cross-connection risk where customers have their own wells and storage systems. So during our site visit, we saw a lot of the private wells and storage systems owned by customers, and they may or may not be connected to the main system. Next slide. Okay, so next, fire safety and emergency action plan. The Boulder Creek area, as you all know, remains highly susceptible to future fires, according to the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. So Big Basin really does need a comprehensive fire safety and emergency action plan to mitigate this. During our site visit, we identified several critical fire safety issues. The first one is accessibility to key infrastructure. So well 4 and some other critical infrastructure sites are hard to reach because of the terrain, and it can hinder emergency response. Backup power is also lacking at a lot of the critical systems. So only one pump station has a generator, leaving the rest along with the SLV intertie vulnerable to power outages. In addition to that, many pump stations are housed in wooden structures, flammable wooden structures. And some of them, like I mentioned before, Rosita and Ober Station, rely on temporary plastic pipes that are at risk of failure or damage during a fire. And lastly, storage tanks, particularly the plastic ones, are vulnerable to heat-related damage as well during wildfire. So all of this increases the vulnerability of Big Basin in the event of a fire. So to address these, we recommended that Big Basin make some immediate improvements to their system, but also eventually develop a comprehensive fire action plan by working with the fire department. So those are our key observations for the technical side. I'll now hand it back to Lydia, who will go over the managerial and financial assessment as well as our recommendations.
Thank you, Rashette. Very much appreciated. So now we're going to move to the managerial side of the house. And I think of the technical, managerial, and financial aspects of a utility as a three-legged stool. The stool can't stand up without all three legs being pretty stable. So these other areas are very important as well. So to briefly orient you, we've got the organizational chart here. On the left is how the system is being operated now, with the receiver managing it on behalf of the court and Cypress Water doing the day-to-day operations. The owners shown off to the side here are still the owners, but don't currently have an active role. On the right is how the system was managed prior to the receivership, with the owners managing and the Moores, or some of the owners, doing the day-to-day operations. And when we look at the managerial side, we've kept in mind that the receivership is a temporary thing and a sustainable long-term solution is needed. So here are observations on the managerial side. So staffing is one of those key things for managing a utility, as you can imagine. While the day-to-day needs are covered in the receiver, and he's done great work to keep the lights on and keep the essential services flowing, there's not capacity for some of the other things that are important for utility, long-term planning, both financial and engineering, things like that would be important. Communications, with just a few staff, it can be very hard to get the word out on customer communications, and more help on that would be beneficial. Records, policies, and plans. Rashette mentioned this already, but I'll talk about records. So as you know, many of the utility records were destroyed in the fire, and gathering what exists and filling in the gaps is in progress. But Big Basin has recently hit a great milestone by online mapping of all the distribution infrastructure. That's huge. Not all utilities have that in the best of circumstances. So that's really key to being able to manage it day to day and look towards planning the future. As far as policies, Big Basin does have some of the policies that are considered best practice, like how new customers connected to water service and a formal rate structure, but it is missing other ones that are pretty crucial, like personnel and security. As far as plans, these are planning for both the near and long-term management, and some key ones that are currently not in place. One that Rashette already mentioned, that cross-connection control, which prevents contamination from coming into the system and is required by the state, as well as distribution system flushing, which cleans out the pipes from that stuff that builds up, routine maintenance, and a power outage plan. And all these items are pretty important. Two other things of importance that we noticed, easements. Easements are when water utility infrastructure is on someone else's property and they record their official permission to be there, even if the property changes hands. So currently those are handshake agreements, which need to be made formal. And at the time of this report, the other item was Big Basin lacked insurance, and the receiver has made some good progress on that front to date, which is great. Okay, now over to the financials. Oops, there we go. Okay, I want to give you a sense of what we looked at first, and then we'll go over some of the details. So we looked at the budget, specifically historic revenues and expenditures, cash on hand and reserves, which are the equivalent of the cash in your wallet and your savings account, and there should be enough to cover an unexpected expense or a minor emergencies. Capital improvement plan is a plan to replace your infrastructure when needed, from rehabbing and recoding a tank to replacing pumps and other stuff. Debt is looking at what's currently owed and whether utility is in a position to borrow when needed to put it in those capital improvements. And financial controls, which are the policies and procedures to make sure that proper financial oversight is in place. Here are the historic revenues and expenditures for Big Basin going back to 2009. This is from the LAFCO memo that Mr. Joe mentioned back from March. And you can see here that the years in some of the years, the dark green bar, which is on the left, which is revenues, is shorter than the light green bar on the right, which is expenditures. And that means that less money is coming in than was going out. And in 2021 and 22, you can see the gap is quite large. So this tells me immediately that a utility is in trouble financially. Another way of looking at that, it is the operating ratio, which is revenues divided by expenses. Anything below the line, which is less than 1, is not breaking even. This is the last 5 years of Big Basin's former management. You can see 2020 is a little higher, but that is because of the insurance payment following the fire. And currently, as Rachette mentioned, Big Basin is greatly affected when it needs to purchase water from San Lorenzo Valley. That water costs more than what you as customers are paying, though it sounds like in the last month, the intertie has only been used once, which is great. Though the rates were increased this year, it is difficult to keep up with the cost of both the purchase water and the need for repairs. And the grant that the county was instrumental in getting has helped, but that is not a long-term solution. That is a stopgap. So as much as I hate to say it, I do think Big Basin needs to look at raising rates again in the future, and I am sorry about that. Days of cash on hand. So days of cash on hand represents money that is readily accessible to pay everyday expenses. And best practice is to keep roughly 6 months or 180 days of cash on hand for revenue going up and down, for expenses going up and down, just to have that cushion. At the end of 2022, Big Basin had 1 day of cash on hand. And it is my understanding that when the receiver took over in the fall of 23, it was still in a pretty dire position, and that has improved some, but it is something to keep an eye on. There were also no designated reserves for emergencies or other purposes. Rates. So I know there are probably some questions about how Big Basin's rates compare to some of your neighbors. So we've included in the report and shown here a snapshot of Big Basin's current rates after the recent increase compared to a cross-section of providers in Santa Cruz County. And you can see that Big Basin is sitting in the number 5 position, I believe, or number 6 out of 8. I don't have a slide for the capital improvement plan or asset management plan because Big Basin at this point does not have either of those. So here's a summary of the financial observations. The rates are not keeping up with day-to-day or longer-term maintenance and replacement and refurbishment expenses. There's no formal plan for needed capital improvements or tracking the condition and needed repairs on assets. And this is because the receiver is focused on day-to-day keeping the lights on at the moment, and is doing that well without a lot of resources. But this is, in the best case scenario, you would have these kinds of plans in place. And the overall financial picture, with the revenues lower than expenses, really affects the ability to borrow to finance needed capital improvements. Okay. These following slides are going to show our recommendations, which are broken down into short, medium, and long term. And we're going to provide these slides to the receiver to publish on the website so you can look at these more in detail. I'm not going to have time tonight to read through all of the recommendations, but I want to give you a sense of the flavor. So from our observations on the technical, managerial, and financial pieces, we developed a set of recommendations broken into short, medium, and long term. Short term is within the next year, medium is 1 to 3 years, and long term is 3 to 5. For the short term recommendations, we have 20 items. They range from addressing contamination risks to security improvements to repairing important infrastructure and putting important plans in place. And these are the things that we feel are most critical to address sooner rather than later. So here's the first set of 10, and then the second set of 10. And these, as I say, they're at the beginning and the end of the report, as well as we'll get the slides to you. For the medium term recommendations, we've got 15 items, and they include things like rehabilitating the active well, meter replacement, and implementing emergency plans. And these are things that we feel are in the midterm, not super urgent, but needing attention fairly soon. And here's the rest of them. And again, we'll provide these to you. And then for long term, there are 11 items, things like exploring long-term alternatives for sufficient water supply, cleaning, inspection, and maintenance programs for wells, tanks, and pump stations, addressing those temporary creek crossings, which are pipes strung across the creek without permanent infrastructure. And again, these lists are repeated in the report. And I would say that these recommendations overall are pretty extensive. There's a lot to do moving forward, but I'm already seeing that the receiver is making good progress on those items that are most urgent, which is good. So now I want to pivot to the possible paths forward. And this is what Mr. Joe alluded to in terms of what is the future like. And this is the second part of our analysis. So I'll start with what alternatives were considered. So these stemmed from the LAFCO report back in March, and we divided them into 3 categories. First, we have annexation, and that would be with San Lorenzo Valley Water District. Then we have our hybrid options, which include a county service area, which is a district run by the county, consolidation with another district, or acquisition by an existing private company. And hybrid in this case refers to the fact that these other districts wouldn't be physically connected to or near Big Basin. So while there are some efficiencies to be gained by joining an existing district, in some respects it still is like a standalone entity, which is the third option. So among standalone, we have a new special district, a new mutual water company, or a new private company. Okay, so I want to walk you through the criteria that we use to evaluate these options and then show you the results. The first criteria category is level of service. And I want to talk about what this includes, because I think these are important things that we tried to capture as much as we could about what does it mean to be a good utility, and how do the utilities, the options available, stack up to that. So first we have technical capacity, which we measured of the options that are available. We looked at, has that entity had any observed deficiencies or outstanding violations, and whether the operators currently working for that option have appropriate certifications for Big Basin's requirements. Operations experience, which we measure by how long the entity has operated a water utility. The ability to prepare for and respond to emergencies, measured by whether they have additional resources that they could deploy in an emergency and whether they're part of an emergency network. And we wanted to call that out specifically in this community, given the history. We wanted to break out emergencies specifically. And then lastly, improving customer service, which we're measuring by a lack of repeated or extended outages that would affect your day-to-day service, whether a utility has existing customer service capabilities, and whether they have things like online bill pay that would be helpful to customers. And before we start looking at the scores, I want to pause here and to note for you that none of these options are perfect. Each has things that the receiver is going to need to consider in terms of what is best moving forward. So this graphic here shows how the alternatives compare to each other within that category of level of service. So for example, outlined in the blue here is the operations experience measure. The 5 in green are rated high because they've been providing water service for a multitude of years. Pajaro Valley is low because it does not operate a water utility. And the new options are blank because they're to be determined. They could hire very experienced staff or newly qualified staff. And you can see that they're kind of a range of scores going on there. The second category is cost and affordability, which includes access to capital funding and financing, things like grants, loans, assessments, bonds, and what interest rates would be available to those options. Whether a rate of return to the investors is applicable, which it is for the private options only. Whether customer rates will increase. Operational efficiencies, which measures how much they will benefit from sharing expenses like management, insurance, billing, equipment. And whether the option currently has a customer affordability program. So here we have how they scored on that. And in blue is the measure on access to capital funding. So the ones in green have access to all the kinds of capital funding. The ones in yellow have limitations on grants, and the two private company options cannot do assessments on property. So less options moving forward. Third category, and this is the last one, ownership and governance. And that includes accountability measured by whether the governing board is elected by customers. Transparency, how much information about the utility operations is publicly available. Management oversight and experience, which is how much experience the governing board has in operating a similar utility. And opportunities for community representation on boards, which is what it sounds like. Whether customers are represented on the governing board. And here we have how the alternatives compare to each other in that category. And in blue, I have the transparency measure. So the ones in green have really good access to public records, regular audits, published financials, water quality reports. The ones in red are only required to publish water quality data, and their meetings may be close to the public because they're private. And the yellow one is in between. It would publish water quality data, but is not subject to the Public Records Act. And meetings are open to shareholders and tenants, but not necessarily the public. So overall, you can see, again, there's really a range of how they are scoring. Okay, so after that extensive analysis, which I had to cover really quickly here today, but is available in the report, here's our ranked list of alternatives. Annexation to San Lorenzo Valley Water, county service area, annexation to another utility, except for the ones below, Central Water District, an existing investor-owned private company, a new special district, Pajaro Valley Water Management Agency, a new mutual water company, and a new private company. And again, none of these is perfect as a solution or simple to implement. But with our recommendation, the receiver can have those conversations and make an informed recommendation to the court about the future of Big Basin. That concludes our presentation. It is our continued honor to work with Big Basin, and I'll turn it back over to Nick and we'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia and Rachette. I don't even know what to say. So thank you kindly. And I look forward to publishing your slides on the website, as you mentioned, for all to be able to review in depth. So third now and finally, I now have the pleasure of introducing Vida Lopez and perhaps Jean Thompson as well from the Rural Communities Assistance Center, also known as RCAC. Vida, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, I'm Vida Lopez, and I'm the Small Utility Project Manager with RCAC, a Rural Community Assistance Corporation. RCAC is part of a national organization. We have a sister corporations that are all served through our Rural Community Assistance Partnership, receiving federal funding. RCAC is an individual sister corporations which receive state funding for specific projects. And RCAC covers the Western states, and our corporate office is located in West Sacramento, California. As part of the application process, the funding agency needs to determine the median household income of the service area. So RCAC is the impartial third-party contractor performing this focused household income survey. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that has taken the time to complete the surveys and returned them to our office. And Jean and I are here if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vita, and I apologize that I misnamed your organization. So thank you very much for all of the work you're doing and for being in such close touch. I know that you've taken quite a bit of time to answer customer questions and so on and so forth. So thank you very much. So we are thank you. Yes, we are nearly at the end of our official program. I will now offer some short substantive remarks regarding the operational and financial status of the Big Basin Water Company. Briefly, I'll mention the wastewater treatment plant to begin. The wastewater treatment plant, as many of you are aware at this point, has been under the operational control of the County of Santa Cruz since July. And the county's also thereby assumed financial liability for the wastewater treatment plant. Since that operational transfer of control, we've been working with the county and with the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board to consummate the transfer agreement. And we're making great progress on that. Effectively, the day-to-day for the customers is going to be unaffected by the consummation of this agreement. It's not quite a formality, but with respect to the operational experience, it's not going to really be felt by the customers, and that's a good thing. Ultimately, what that means is we have to sign various conveyances of real property, finalize the agreement, and then ultimately seek discharge by the court with respect to the wastewater treatment plant receivership. And it's perhaps a good time to remind that there are two separate receiverships that have been ordered and that are in effect by the court. The one pertains exclusively to the wastewater treatment plant, and the other, of course, pertains to the drinking water system. So we will keep the wastewater treatment customers apprised as that all unfolds. And we remain to be very grateful for the county's willingness to assume operational and financial control and liability of the wastewater treatment plant. We believe the customers will be well served by that well into the future. Now, regarding the drinking water system, as Moonshot, Lydia and Rochette from Moonshot mentioned, TMF, it's quite the acronym, but it's very important. TMF is what it is all about. That is technical, managerial, and financial fortitude. In a way, we can summarize the Water Board's goal for Big Basin by using this acronym. The desire and the goal that we share as well is to find a way to bring the technical, managerial, and financial prowess into the Big Basin water system permanently that is required for the system to operate according to all state and local laws and regulations, and to, of course, serve the customers, the customers, with safe and reliable drinking water. Funding. I'm going to kind of do kind of a quick survey here of some of the key points. As a reminder, when we were appointed by the Superior Court in September of last year, there was less than $300 in the operating account. Less than $300. And in addition, countless liabilities, quantifiable and unquantifiable. Thanks to the county and the support of the Department of Water Resources and so many people, we were able to secure an $850,000 grant from the Department of Water Resources through the county. Really, the county secured the grant. The county is administering the grant. And OR3 especially is deserving of great praise for the massive amount of work and burden that they've taken on to process, to advance those funds to Big Basin, to process those payments, to interact with TWR. It's a massive effort. But in any case, to date, $569,094 has been paid to the Big Basin Water Company out of these grant funds by the County of Santa Cruz. Over half of $1 million, therefore, has to date been reimbursed to the Big Basin Water Company and submitted against the $850,000 grant to support emergency operations. In addition, we secured $146,576.07 in COVID arrearage funding. We have collected $495,979.86 between January 3rd of this year and November 5th of this year in customer revenue. This averages out to roughly $50,000 a month. Although, as you all know, it wasn't until recently that we've been able to start regularly on a monthly billing cycle issuing bills for a number of reasons. And so the hope is that moving forward, the customer revenue stream is more consistent, will allow us to budget and plan accordingly. Note that hundreds of customers still have past due and overdue balances. And this is, it's unacceptable. And it cannot continue. The Big Basin Water Company will be adopting and publishing and serving notice of its formal water shutoff policy imminently. And once in effect, we will vigorously enforce that policy pursuant to state law. There will be, pursuant to state law, customer payment plan options, so on and so forth, for those that have an earnest need for it. But unfortunately, I can tell you, based on numerous instances of personal experience, phone calls and emails from customers, there are a number of people that really just do not want to pay their bill. And that it really cannot continue to occur. All in all, to kind of bring all of the financial picture together, as of today, between Big Basin's cash holdings, the remaining grant funds, and the COVID arrearage funds, Big Basin currently holds approximately $330,000. That is $330,000 in non-committed funds to support emergency operations. And this is, of course, until additional funding is secured. Customer revenues continue to be deficient to support the massive operational expenditures that the Big Basin Water Company has, and the multitude of upgrades, repairs, and other infrastructure improvements that are required, imminently required by the state of California. So that $330,000 is a very good sign. We do continue to have funding to augment the customer revenues that are insufficient to cover costs. But of course, additional funding will be necessary because that $330,000 surplus, and I hesitate to call it a surplus, will not get us, you know, will not get us by forever. That is for certain. But I do hope that we can all see the positive in this without being overly optimistic. The reality is that the Big Basin Water Company cannot support itself by its customer revenues and continues to require additional funding to support its emergency operations and its compliance. So moving forward on the funding side, we're going to continue to work with the county and the Department of Water Resources to responsibly use and make the highest use of the remaining grant funds. We will also do our best to secure funds through another department within the Water Board, the Department of Financial Assistance. Conversations are ongoing with DFA. Moonshot is lending great support on that front as well. The important thing to realize about the DFA, Department of Financial Assistance funding, is that it is only available, if it's available at all, where there is, for a private company like the Big Basin Water Company, where there is some public consolidation in motion, some effort. And so that is a key component to recognize. So pending our progress in conversing with the San Lorenzo Valley Water District and other factors, that DFA funding may or may not be available. It's too soon to say, but it's important to recognize that we are pursuing it and doing our best to show some positive momentum in the direction of a public consolidation to be eligible. As a general rule, remember that it remains to be the case that it is extremely difficult and largely impossible, generally speaking, to locate public monies that are capable of being allocated to a private water system. So that is the same story you've heard a few times now, and we continue to grapple with that. In addition, depending on the results of the RCAC household income survey, we may or may not qualify for additional public funds. And so just know that we will continue to keep that in mind as well. We will be, as I've stated previously, pursuing an additional rate increase through the Public Utilities Commission. I see somewhere in the chat a customer had asked about why that hasn't already been completed. There are a few reasons for that, but predominantly the 2023 fiscal year accounting and the corresponding tax return really had to be fleshed out. I don't think it needs to be repeated, but just in case, the accounting was effectively non-existent, to put it lightly, when we took over the Big Basin Water Company. So it's taken quite a bit of time. It's taken quite a talented professional accountant to get the 2023 financials in order, to understand them, to represent them accurately, and to file a return. So now that that's done, we're really just, it's a matter of finalizing our 2025 budget so that we can properly request necessary funds by way of a rate increase and to support our advice letter. Finally, on the funding angle, we will continue negotiations and conversations with interested parties regarding the potential sale of the Big Basin Water Company watershed parcel, which is, again, for those who are unaware, effectively not utilized by the water system. We have met numerous times over the last 6 months with various organizations, and suffice it to say at this point that we are making progress, and will, provide an update whenever possible on that front. I'm going to keep the operations angle fairly slim, just given all of the color that Moonshot's already offered. Of course, I'm happy to answer any particular questions into the Q&A. But for now, we have had no recent outages, and this is something that shouldn't be experientially surprising to most. But I think thematically, it's an exceptional thing to be able to say. We have a stable system. We really do, all things considered. In addition, we've managed to curb the usage of SLV water through the intertie massively. In the last month, we've only had to turn on the intertie for 24 hours. And this was following a power outage that caused some of our VFDs and electrical infrastructure on various pumps to fault. And so there was a lapse basically in our system being able to pump water out of our own source. And so, and by the way, the same goes for the summer months. We managed to use very little SLV water, relatively speaking, right, compared to what we were using at the beginning. Now, you might be wondering why that's the case. Two main factors: leak repair and just increasing the efficiency of our system and operations. We discovered, and by we, I really need to give the credit to Cypress, which is the day-to-day operator, Miles Farmer in particular. Cypress was able to locate an over 40 gallon a minute leak a number of months ago. And it was an insidious leak. It was, deep in the soil and kind of an odd area. And just one example, we've fixed many smaller leaks, another moderate leak, but our leak response, regular servicing of the system has made a massive difference in terms of our ability to sustain and meet rather customer demand. And then secondarily, on the efficiency side, we've upgraded much of our electrical that, for instance, connects our well number 4 pump and the boosters from the well number 4 tank out to the system, such that the generator can be very quickly utilized when there is an emergency situation or a power outage. We've also similarly repaired an automatic transfer switch at another portion of the system that allows for the diesel generator at that location to automatically kick in. And so when these things are fixed and maintained, what we find is that our system, when there is a power outage or some other issue, our system is able to more quickly resume its function and thereby relieve its reliance on outside water. Infrastructure repairs and upgrades are ongoing. We will be doing many things over the next few months, thanks to the DWR grant. We will be focusing to some degree on backflow prevention. This is an issue that Moonshot has discussed and that the state has focused in on. Note that we did receive the results of the State Water Board sanitary survey. We've also received various notices and compliance orders now that Big Basin has started to stabilize, we're spending more time planning for the future and trying to get into regulatory compliance rather than just treading water and hoping that water flows. But along with that is coming an increased insistence on coming into compliance, and it's really there's a massive amount of money that's going to be involved to fully comply with the various violations that are on the record with the State Water Board. The last operational update I'd like to share is regarding mapping and of the system. And to do this last portion, I will share my screen. Lydia, can you just confirm that you can see the screen that I'm showing here?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what we're viewing is a portal populated over the last number of months by Cypress. And what we're seeing here, and we'll continue to zoom in, is an exquisitely populated version of the Big Basin water system overlaid on a map. All known customer water meters are mapped down to the exact geographic coordinate. All main water lines are down to a reasonable degree mapped. All water storage facilities are mapped. In addition, all hydrants are mapped. This is hugely important with respect to fire response. What you're seeing here is the product of months and months and months of extremely diligent work, and it might just seem like a map to some, but what I hope we can all recognize here is that it's not just about plotting points. What we can see here is that the Big Basin Water Company is starting to look like a real water company. We know where our infrastructure is. We don't have to go and dig up lawns to find water meters. We can keep customers accountable. We can keep ourselves accountable. Emergency responders can quickly find key infrastructure in real time. So, I'm very proud of this development. I do commend Cypress for its work on this in particular, and the DWR grant, again, has allowed us to spend the massive amount of time and resources to achieve this step. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I'd just like to offer my final thanks to all of our panelists today, the supervisor, JM, everyone at the county, all of the folks at the Water Board, at CPUC, our state and local representatives, LAFCO, the list goes on. And I will spare the audience here, going through every particular name, but I really do want to say thank you to everybody who's been supporting the Big Basin Water Company. We are still standing. We have a lot of work to do. And I appreciate everyone's attendance here tonight. I look forward to answering your questions and serving you moving forward. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Nick, and thank you to all of our panelists. I'm going to remind our panelists that if you see a question in the chat, that you are well suited to answer, feel free to go ahead and do that while we continue the Q&A portion here. I will try to toggle back and forth between those who are raising their hands to ask questions live, and then try to head back into to the questions that have been asked since the beginning of the meeting. While I wait for folks to raise their hands to ask questions, why don't I start with the first question I see here in the chat. And Nick, you addressed this briefly, but maybe you can briefly sort of clarify again. Are we bringing in enough revenue or funds to pay for Cypress and the water from SLV Water District?
Gosh, on a monthly basis, if you are only looking at Cypress's base fee to serve as the day-to-day operator and the SLV average over the last number of months for water, customer revenues do cover those base things. But the costs go so well beyond those base figures. And without getting into too much excruciating detail, it's very costly to run a receivership estate. Cypress's base rate does not cover emergency response. Perhaps you won't be surprised to hear that, the much of their response is emergency response. Infrastructure upgrades, repairs, equipment, all of these things aren't included in the base rate. So to answer your question as it's written verbatim, yes, but that's a very misleading answer to give without the context. The reality is that customer revenues fall just massively short of supporting the day-to-day response and emergency operations that are required to run the company.
Okay, great. Thank you. I see just one person in attendance who's raising their hands for questions. So I'm going to go back to some of the questions that are here in the chat that have been posed for quite a while now. So this is a question about the RCAC process from David Schumacher, who has a number of questions here, but let's focus on that one. Briefly, our RCAC representatives, could you answer this question about how many questionnaires have been mailed out, how many have been returned? What's the high percentage figure you indicated in your letter on October 11th that must be reached to enable the survey to accurately reflect the community and therefore usable to obtain grant funding? So either Vita or Jean, could you address that question, please?
Hi, this is Vita Lopez. Thank you for your question, David. So currently, we mailed 535 surveys. As of today, we've received 182 surveys. And the percentage that we need for the survey is 38%. So we're still needing about 22 more surveys. And then the other question that he asked was how many surveys were mailed. So we mailed an intro letter on October 11th. And then the first survey was mailed out on October 18th. And then we mailed out a second survey on November 8th. The survey that was mailed out on the 8th, we do use a outside printer and mail house, and the machine that placed the surveys and the envelopes was off due to human error. So we did send in another survey with an apology letter, and we did make the changes on our side. Jean, would you like to explain how we went about doing that with the surveys?
Yeah, so I took the list, the customer list. So we wanted to keep everybody's information confidential. And in order to do that, we didn't want to assign new survey numbers to the same formatted list. So we actually mixed up and scrambled the list so that it was in a different order than previously when we assigned survey numbers, and then reassigned new survey numbers to everyone. So the list isn't in the same consecutive order as the list was when we sent out that second notification in error, in order to keep everybody's information confidential. So again, we just reorganized the list so it was in a different order and reassigned new survey numbers, and then sent out new survey forms. Now, I did review we've received about 50 responses here over the holiday weekend. And what we're doing is, because there is a signature on each one of the responses, we're able to verify and ensure that the person that's responding, that data is going to the appropriate address. So I just want to make everybody ease any concerns that we are paying very much attention. There are 2 of us that are reviewing every single response to make sure that response is and data is entered for the appropriate address that we receive.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. David Schumacher has another couple of questions here regarding the PUC and the rate increase process. That's been touched on a few times here. I'm wondering, Nick, if you want to just briefly, in about 30 seconds, if possible, just address what the process for the next advice letter or an emergency additional rate increase request.
Sure. Well, we have been drafting a traditional advice letter, and we will continue to work with the PUC folks who have been very helpful over the last number of months. And so we'll work with them to draft a good advice letter. We'll finalize it. We'll serve it as required by law. And we will submit it and go through the process.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder for those in attendance, if you have a question you'd like to ask live of the panelists here, you can click on the raise hand feature. I see one attendee who's named By the Way, who would like to ask a question. So I'm going to call on that person, and you should be able to ask your question. And if you know that it's for a specific speaker, please identify that at the top of the question if possible. Thank you. Go ahead, By the Way. You can unmute yourself.
Everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first off, I'd like to thank you all for putting this on. Really helpful and informative. And the water has been a hell of a lot more reliable recently. So I appreciate that, all the work that's been going into that as well. I think my question would be best suited for Nick. Can we have an understanding of kind of who will have the final say on the value of the property or the water system, and what that process would look like? Because just as a background, I worked for a large water company, and we were actually in negotiations to purchase Big Basin Water before the fire, and that was put on hold once the fire hit, and then ultimately, that company backed out. But I was in on the negotiations. I was meeting with the Moores. We were going over the property because my background is in civil engineering, and so. But moving forward, if the water system was sold to a private entity, or say our community wanted to try to form a publicly owned water system here, which I don't know if too many of the community members are interested in that, who's going to have the final say on the valuation of that, and how does that move forward? If you understand, hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Did we speak on the phone a few months ago by chance?
Sorry, Nick, he's been muted already.
No, we didn't. No,
okay.
we have not yet.
My mistake. Okay,
no, that's fine.
Thank you for your question. Short answer is that the court, having asserted its jurisdiction over the system and all of its assets, the court is really in the driver's seat. As the receiver, we serve as the court's hand, as the court's agent, and charting the course, and making recommendations. So ultimately, the court will be deciding based on our recommendation, what to do, who to sell the system to, who to give the system to, how to reorganize the system, so on and so forth. So any of those decisions do fall within the purview of the court's ultimate jurisdiction. The petitioner, the plaintiff in the case being the Division of Drinking Water, California Water Board, represented by the Attorney General's office, will weigh in. The Moores, as the defendants, as the owners, will weigh in, and the customers will weigh in as they might like to take part in the proceedings or buy in through my office. And it's really that angle that I would encourage. I view my job in large part to be one of requiring my understanding of where the customers fall on these sorts of things. So if you'd like to send me an email or proffer a particular recommendation at any point, please do so.
Okay, great. Seeing no hands among the attendees, I'll go back to the questions in the Q&A function here. I see a question from Chandra relative specifically to the Hill House Road neighborhood. And Nick, I might just request that you follow up with Chandra directly, since that's a neighborhood specific question, and we want to save the little time that we have left maybe for more system-wide process questions, if that's okay. So Chandra, if you could share your contact information directly with Nick, if he doesn't have it already, or Nick can type an answer for you here, we'll make sure that you get an answer about your neighborhood there. The next question from Linda: how could something as important as a water system in the 21st century in a state as large as California be allowed to get so bad for so long with no oversight by any public agency? That's a tough question. I think there are some of us on here who would give varying answers, and we could probably be here another half hour discussing that. But Lydia, I'm going to call on you to maybe provide an answer that's a little bit more of a 30,000-foot response about private water systems in California and the challenges that they are sort of facing more broadly, and the fact that Big Basin isn't the only system that's had a history of non-compliance with the state. And in fact, there's a place where people can go and get more information online about such systems. So if you could just briefly kind of answer the question through that broader perspective.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for that question. I think it's a good one. I think that in some ways, Big Basin is not alone. As you say, is a database of failing systems throughout California on the Safer website that talks about kind of what criteria account for something that's failing. And it's a lot of what we talked about today, that missing big pieces of the technical, managerial, financial that are key for this. I do think that the fire absolutely exacerbated what was already happening, and it made it very difficult to be self-sustaining. So to me, that's a crucial piece in this case. But it's a very good question. Big Basin is not alone in terms of systems that are failing, particularly private ones. Small or smaller than Big Basin are having issues like this all over the state.
Thank you. The next question, which is from Allison Breeze, has to do, Lydia and Rochette, with your report. So I just wonder if maybe there's some number specific questions there. Maybe you could type your answer so Allison could see that there. That would be great. Thank you. The next question is from Greg. And then we'll go back to the one hand I see among the participants. Greg asked, can the county or the state force San Lorenzo Water District to buy or take ownership of the water company? It does not look like anyone in their clear mind would want to buy it in this horrible condition. So, Joe, did you want to, as our LAFCO director for Santa Cruz County, just briefly address that?
Yeah. So short answer is no. No, we can't force a water district to annex or add territory into their jurisdiction. Just as the same way, on the flip side, we can't force Big Basin community to be part of a water district, whether it's San Lorenzo or another one. In order for any boundary change to occur, all affected parties need to be in support. What I mean by that is the county needs to be in support because it's an unincorporated territory. The water district, in this case, is hypothetical annexation to San Lorenzo Valley Water. San Lorenzo Valley Water District must be in support of annexation. And also under state law, they need to provide LAFCO that they're willing and capable of providing services to the community. We also, because this is a unique situation, we also need approval from the court receiver about this proposed annexation. And finally, and more importantly, the community needs to support this hypothetical annexation. So as long as all affected parties are in support and on the same page, then yes, annexation could occur, but we can't force the water districts, nor can we force the community to. Everyone has to be on the same page. And we've seen that. We've been successful with Lompico Water District. The Lompico Water District board supported the merger with San Lorenzo Valley Water. The San Lorenzo Valley Water Board approved or supported that merger, and the residents, the Lompico residents, supported that. Now, on top of that, the Lompico residents even supported and voted on a bond measure. So they formed an assessment district to pay or to cover the offset costs to update their infrastructure so that it was more sustainable for San Lorenzo Valley Water to assume that responsibility. So again, all affected parties need to be in support of an annexation or any boundary change.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. So we are 2 minutes over time right now, but given that our presentations went long, I'd be willing, I think other panelists willing to stay on for an additional 10 to 15 minutes or so to try to get through some of these questions. I see some questions in the chat here that I think some of our panelists could probably address through written responses. So if that's possible, if you see an opportunity to do that, panelists, I would ask you to try to address those. And I'm going to go to the hands that I see over here among attendees. We'll start with Gino Murdoch. I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. And again, if you know who would be, whoops, looks like we lost Gene. Okay, well, Gino, if you want to come back on and, oh, no, there he is again. Okay. So Gino, I'm going to unmute you and allow you to ask your question. And if you know who would be best suited to answer your question, please address it to that person. Otherwise, we'll identify a responder. You're able to unmute yourself now.
Hello, everybody. Also, thanks to all you guys for all the work you guys do. Doesn't go unnoticed. I had two questions. One for the committee that's responsible for the income survey. Would it be fruitious for a person making above a stated income to be a part of this? Is there an income threshold that would be not fortuitous for us to involve our income survey with this? For instance, this may be like, I'm not too familiar with it, but is this like a low income kind of strategic move that we're making? Just thoughts on that. I'm sure some people are kind of leery of submitting it because of their income or whatnot, or whatever that may be. So there's that question. And then the second question would be more towards Nick Jaber. I was wondering what we're looking at for an ultimate income operating, an operating cost month by month for the water company once it's all said and done, everything's operating up to system standards. Just thinking out loud, you stated that we're having approximately about $50,000 of income from our payees, and will that be sufficient for an income or an operating income once everything's completed as far as repairs and getting up to state standards. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, Gino. I'll have our folks, Vita and or Jean, answer the first part of that question, and then briefly, and then Nick, if you could follow with a brief response about the functional budget.
Yeah, Vita, I can go ahead and answer the question. Yeah, it's, we're using the median household income, so it's going to be based upon the lowest income that's reported to the highest income that's reported, and what that median is what we're trying to determine with the income survey. So it'd be rather high income or you're a lower income. I mean, it doesn't matter. By requiring a 38% response based on the size of the community, the State Water Resource Control Board feels that that's adequate information to determine an accurate median household income for the community.
All right. Thank you. And Nick, there was a similar question. I think if I understood the question, there was also a similar question from Chris Taylor in the chat about would BBWC be self-supporting if everyone, even those who don't want to, paid their bills? What percentage of increase would make it functionally supporting? It seems like that's relative to your potential response to the previous question. So,
Yeah. So for that question and Gino's, I have to tell you, it's really a spitball. You're right on the money in how the basis for your question, which is, you're assuming that the lion's share of the money that's required right now on a regular basis is to gain compliance and to support kind of extraordinary costs and expenses, which won't be around forever, including not limited to the receivership costs. So that's right on the money. I mean, that's accurate. We cannot tell what it will eventually cost to run the system. It'll matter how big of an organization is running it. Is there going to be a benefit from an economy of scale? What type of expertise is going to be required under the state law once all the cards fall? So once the system's in compliance, what types of engineers are going to have to be hired, and what type of permanent staff is going to be necessary? So I really hate to tell you that I can't give you an answer, but there is just no way for me to offer an educated approximation at this point of what the normal operating costs will be once everything is in compliance. Final move on that has to do with the ultimate structure of the system. So, I'm sure operational costs will be wildly different if San Lorenzo is running it versus if a different small private water company wants to buy it, or if the customers want to form a mutual. So it really is going to depend on regulatory factors. It's going to depend on the economy of scale component, and it's going to depend on what type of ultimate structure the system takes. But thank you for your question.
and Nick, just a quick follow-up question from the chat was about if all customers paid their bills, even if they didn't want to, I think the question was, would that be sufficient to provide enough funding for the company at this point?
It would. No, I mean, you're honing in on one of the unfortunate realities, which is we need support beyond customer revenue, but customer revenue must be higher as well, not only to support ourselves now, but to support the company in with respect to its being viable and attractive to some ultimate suitor. So if you were to take, and I'm speaking out of turn, I'm just using this by way of example. If San Lorenzo were to seriously consider at some point taking over the Big Basin Water Company, the rates would have to reach San Lorenzo's rates, and there are a lot of ways that can happen. But you know, the case in point is it's just as much about funding ourselves now as it is about making the water company sustainable, looking ahead. So I hope that's specific enough for you.
Yeah. I think the short answer is yes, everything helps. At this
Yes, and
juncture,
and
yeah.
also, I'm sorry, I do want to mention one more thing. The big basins rates are just low when you look at what other private systems of similar size even are charging, but certainly geographically. And so, on at a relative level, but also just at a cost and sense level, the rates need to get as close as possible to achieving parity, but in line with the Public Utilities Commission's standards and criterion. So they will do their job to mitigate what they would term rate shock, and they will weigh that against the needs of the system. And the needs of the system now might be the highest, might be higher than they will be in a few years when the receiver's gone, even with inflation. I don't know, but what I do know is that the receivership is extremely expensive to fund, and the numerosity and the scale and the complexity of the upgrades and repairs and regulatory hurdles that we face right now are just almost beyond imagination. And so, yeah, there's no customer rate that could save the system, but there's a customer rate that can get us closer and at least buy us enough time to get to the point where we can locate additional funding, whether it's through a public source, whether it's through the sale of a land asset or some other way.
Okay, thank you. Sandra and Michael Love, I'm going to call on you. Thank you for your patience. You've had a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to unmute you now, and you can ask your questions
Okay, can you hear me?
live. Yes.
Okay, great. I don't know if you're aware of it, but you passed over some of my questions, so I wonder if I can just go ahead and ask them now.
Please do.
Okay. What I was asking about was we were told after the fire that a lot of the wells were damaged. And if you look at the California records, I can't tell you exactly which one it is, but when we looked it up and during the previous PUC meetings where we were discussing rate hikes, we were always told that there were 6 active wells. And I know now.
Active and inactive.
Pardon?
Inactive and active.
Well,
combined,
but I think there was only 1 inactive and there were 5 active wells. So what we're trying to understand is what can be done to actually resurrect the wells that have supposedly been damaged by the fire that were active before to make more viable water sources. And another question that has to do with the Moonshot folks is, and also Cypress even, are you aware of the number of customers that have non-metered access? Because whenever the PUC rate increases were discussed, there was always the rate increases for the metered customers and the non-metered customers.
Okay, thank you, Sandra and Michael. Lydia, could you just take both of those questions? It seems like the first question would call on some of the findings in your report as well as the second question.
So I think, we looked at everything and walked to every place that was accessible. I think there's maybe a little bit of semantics going on here in terms of wells versus surface water intakes. The surface water intakes were all damaged in the fire. And the wells are the ones that Rachette went through. So well number 4 is active, well number 2 is active but really low producing. Number 1 is completely inactive, and 5 needs to be located and checked. So those are the ones that the state has a record of. Those are the ones that we were able to look at when we were there. But in terms of the surface water, to restore those, you'd have to restore both the intakes and the pipes down to the treatment plant and rebuild the treatment plant. And that's pretty extensive. So that's something that needs to be looked at in the future about, is that the most viable option for getting better supply, as we said, but it's one of the things to definitely look at. And And I'm going to need reminding about what the second part of the question was. I was so focused on the first part.
Sandra, you can go ahead and
Yeah.
unmute and ask that question
Oh,
again if you
okay.
like.
It has to do with, are you folks aware of the number of non-metered customers that are part of the system? Because when we always did the PUC rate increases, they always talked about the rate increases for the metered customers versus the non-metered customers. And I wasn't sure if, Cypress had been also trying to find all the non-metered customers as well.
I'm going to defer to Nick on that one. I do know that there are some, but he would have an update on what's been located and what they know about.
The short answer is I don't know off the top of my head. We do bill people according to the type of service they have. So we are building and do have some current record of those customers that are on unmetered access. But importantly, note that it's not as though unmetered customers are not getting rate increased. The PUC does set and did set this year with our rate increase that you're mentioning a far higher rate for unmetered service as well. And so depending on the customer's use case, it can either be of benefit to the customer or it can be of detriment to the company. And so that's the short answer.
Okay, great. Thank you. There's a question here from Ann T about the income survey, and I'm wondering if our folks from our partner group there could address that question by typing out an answer for Ann. That would be helpful. And then I think we have time really for just one additional question here from the chat, and I'm going to choose Adam Widmers because it's a question that we've received a lot over the last couple of years. Is all of the money from the grant and the ratepayers going directly to maintenance, service, and potential improvements, or is there some requirement that the money goes to the owners? So Nick, I will ask you to address that one, please.
Yeah, the court receiver, my office, is in full possession and control of all assets of the system, and this includes revenues. All funding that I've mentioned tonight, all conceivable funding, say from the sale of a real property asset or from some other source, that is within the possession and control of the court receiver on behalf of the court for the to be used for the benefit of the water company and its customers. Short answer, no, the revenues that we're collecting are going straight to the emergency operations. All the grant funds, the COVID arrearage funds, all the funds that I could possibly imagine, those are going only to support the system, the receivership liabilities, the operational upgrades, compliance, the whole gamut. If there is a purchase price, if there is positive equity at the end of all of this, and I won't comment unless I particularly asked about what I think is going to happen on that. I think everybody has an idea. It's unlikely, in my view, I guess I am commenting on it. It's unlikely, in my view, that the Big Basin water system will sell for a positive purchase price, given everything we know. But look, given the extent and the nature of the problems that the system faces, I believe, unfortunately, for the Moors, I can't say for certain, but I believe, unfortunately, it's more likely than not that there will not be assets left over for the owners of the company. That's my opinion based off of my experience so far and my understanding of the financials to date. But the customer should rest assured that every single dollar that they pay into the system and every single dollar that we secure on behalf of the system goes to support the system. I saw a question about the website. I want to remind everybody the Big Basin Water Company website has been operational for many, many months now. So bigbasinwater.com. Please check that out whenever you can. We are constantly updating it. Cypress is constantly updating it. If there's an emergency, you can bet that there will be a notice about it, posted on the website. Finally, someone asked about failing water systems. There are currently, according to the SAFER program, the water board's metrics, there are 384 failing systems in the state of California, affecting 783,000 people. So this is a very large problem. But to my knowledge, Big Basin Water Company is the largest private system that's gone into receivership. So with those facts, thank you very much.
Thank you. And also, just speaking of your website, Nick, just wanted to remind our attendees here that we will have a recording of this program linked through the county's YouTube channel, which we can also share with you to link on your site so customers can get that and get this recording directly on your site. And with that, for just a brief closing remark, I'll turn it back to Supervisor McPherson.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I think we had 75 to 80 attendees, which is really very good and much appreciated. Big problem. A lot of people involved, and I'm not going to name them all again. I can't tell everyone how thankful JM and I are for being part of the team to get this. I don't know if we can say we're on the last lap, but we're getting there, and we're close to it. I just want to thank everyone again for their patience, their understanding. This is, like I said, probably the most complicated, all-inclusive type of a project that I've had to go through in my 25 years of public service. It's an education I wish I didn't have to go through, but because we have a good team of people working on it, we're going to get there. So just keep the faith, have a good Christmas, and we'll get there and have a real good water system for people in Big Basin in the very near future, I hope.
Great. Thank you all for attending tonight. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.